Yo, what's up my YouTube army? It's your boy, David RB, coming at you with a new Arcadian Rift devlog. First, I want to talk to you about Raid Shadow Legends, available now in the Apple Store. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and slap the notification sponsored by Skillspace. If you need a website taken out for Skillspace guy. Okay, anyway, this month I worked primarily on 3 different things: weapons, Alpha 1.0, and bug fixing. I did all these things kind of simultaneously, so in this devlog I'm going to go in a more thematic order, rather than the kind of chronological order I normally go in. However, before I start, I want to answer the most frequently asked question I've been seeing, which is what task managing app I use. It's called ClickUp, which is very similar to Trello, but there was something about the dark mode that was hard to get in Trello, whereas it just comes default in ClickUp. That was literally the main reason I use it. Also, I want to just say thank you to everyone who's been leaving comments. The last devlog got a lot more exposure, and I had a ton of new comments, and I honestly read as many as I possibly could. And I really enjoy reading them and hearing opinions, feedback, ideas, so please don't hesitate to leave a comment on this video, or even multiple comments. And with that, let's begin this last month in review. Starting with weapons, I really wanted to prioritize weapons and just get them all finished and done, as that was like a huge chunk of the game that I wouldn't need to come back to and relearn how I had all the animations and blend spaces set up and all that. So I spoke with a few of my friends, and we decided exactly how many weapons we thought should be in the game, total, what their functions would be, their names, and then I got to work. Since I'm not a 2D artist, I used the original concept art flare created for the weapons, and then went into Microsoft Paint, the best program ever, and cut pieces of the weapons apart and used the existing concept art to design the remaining weapons. Literally every new weapon was designed just using this technique. All the weapons then had a huge pipeline of processes from modeling, rigging, animating, implementation, code, VFX, UI, crosshairs, and so much more stuff. Okay, well, not so much more, that was mostly it. I did actually draw the concepts for crosshairs and had a lot of fun doing that. With each weapon, I'm aiming to give some sort of unique kind of role or purpose. I didn't want 2 weapons which would functionally serve the same purpose and maybe just have like, oh, this one's got slightly more fire rate or more damage. Instead, I wanted each weapon to be unique and kind of personalized, so you might switch to a different weapon or loadout depending on circumstances. First is the Q cannon, which was left unfinished previously as when the gadgets were introduced. We renamed it to the Cyclone laser cannon, which seemed fitting with the other names and also because of the rotating front. I designed a material that would tile as the mesh scales in size. That way the texture would remain, it would look nice and not like kind of stretch out and scale and turn weird if the beam were to change sizes dynamically, which it will. I then put this to work with a lot of other effects and created an awesome looking beam attack for the Cyclone. While it releases a ton of sustained damage, there's an interesting side effect where your speed and sensitivity are pretty heavily reduced as you fire, so it's difficult to hit multiple targets if they're all scattered, and also kind of leaves you more susceptible to damage. Next is the Squall pistol. This is the second of 2 pistols in the game. The idea here is that it doesn't do much damage at all, but it applies a slow effect on enemies, causing their movement speed to be cut in half while the effect lasts. For the pistol, I decided to actually model and rig a magazine, since I had actually forgotten that when making the Riptide. And the VFX here are designed to look a little more harmless, thus you see softer muzzle flashes, impacts, and effects. I had some weird glitches with the impulses for a bit. Then we get the Hammerhead shotgun. I'm always a huge fan of shotguns in games. I pretty much always lean towards those weapons and those classes. So designing this was a whole lot of fun, especially all the different animations for deploying, reloading, and even the VFX for the kind of scattered shots that go out in a cone. An interesting note here is that originally I was going to have the reload more like you see a lot in games like Halo, other shotguns, where you load shells in one at a time, you get one more ammo in every time you reload, but you can kind of stop it in the middle and all that complicated stuff. However, it was a whole new process of stringing together kind of multiple animation sequences and rewriting my reload blueprint so it would update every time you put it in, and I instead just decided to have the actual shell as more of a power source, since the guns all fire energy-based attacks anyway. And these are the kind of decisions, I'm trying to make these decisions to make sure that I can actually finish this game. As long as it's still fun, looks good enough, and works, I don't want to just spend a whole bunch of time like learning some really unique thing that's only going to be used once. I'm not really going to like get that much out of it. Here we have the Hydra Splitter Rifle, which is maybe my favorite weapon of all at the moment. I love the big kind of vertical first-person view. I spent a long time on the firing process, getting just the right amount of kind of shake and quiver, having the lights move down the rail, and if that wasn't already cool, it got even cooler when it came time for the VFX. I decided to purchase an electricity/lightning pack off the Unreal Marketplace. I found one by Rime, which was crazy underpriced. It came with a lot of tutorials, used Niagara, which allowed me to kind of learn some Niagara from it, and had a lot of effects I really wanted. Normally I'm super hesitant about these kind of like packs or preset kind of things, as I like to kind of learn how to do things myself, just so I'm learning, and kind of keep more of artistic consistency. However, here I knew that if I tried to make electricity, it would take a really long time, probably not look very good, and it wouldn't be very reusable. Luckily this lightning, fits right in, and after just doing a few quick tests in a temporary scene to get a feel for it, I decided to apply it to the Hydra, and dang does it look cool. And this weapon hits a target and then branches electricity, energy stuff between all neighboring enemies. Oh, what's cool is that there was a little glitch I had that I actually decided to keep in, which is where if you miss an enemy and you hit like the floor or nearby a wall, the electricity will still branch from that point, so you may actually still hit a target, do some damage. These effects were all done literally in a single day, by the way. Like, I woke up not knowing how I was going to do electricity, saw a pack, got the pack, learned it. It was really easy to learn, made it look awesome before heading out for the night, which shows how useful this pack was, and I'm definitely glad I got it, because I'd probably still be doing electricity if I didn't. Moving along, we have the Mine Launcher, whose exact name I'm still not fully happy with, so it's just Mine Launcher for now. While the Hydra is my favorite weapon overall, I think the Mine Launcher wins for best reload animation. The weapon fires these little mines that stick to surfaces or objects, and then wait for enemies to pass by and then explode. If you directly hit an enemy, the mines will immediately explode, dealing some splash damage. I actually struggled with this weapon for quite a whole long time, spending almost like the entire day dealing with bugs and problems I couldn't figure out. I nearly scrapped the mine idea and was just going to make it like a purely grenade launcher, but I did get there in the end. I'm glad for it. The design for this weapon is, of course, to act more as a defensive weapon. We have a lot of very offensive weapons. I thought kind of mixing it up and having one that we can, can lay mines and choke points or passageways. And there are, of course, some interesting uses for the weapon that I'm going to intentionally leave in the game. And finally, the Kraken. Right, sorry, that's the wrong prototype. I present to you the Kraken. The god-tier rotary missile launcher weapon thing is something you might kind of acquire near the end of the game by completing maybe some kind of unique or challenging thing, probably some kind of mission, maybe a boss. Concepting this one was definitely rough. The sketch I put together in Paint was designed to be some big, heavy, kind of underhand cannon thing, but one single barrel didn't feel right. I wanted something more like the Rhino from Ratchet & Clank. I went through a ton of designs, and this honestly took like 2 full days of concepting and prototyping and just making little blockouts in Blender. One of the designs was looking pretty good, but we kept seeing this weird face, like the statues from Easter Island suddenly grew dreadlocks. Finally, I landed on the one I was happy with. The shape ended up looking, honestly, more shark-like, which fits the kind of sea creature theme of all the weapon names. But then I did give it the tubes, kind of 8 tubes, like 8 Kraken tentacles. It still looks way more like a shark, though. But I do want to call it the Kraken because it sounds cool. So I don't know. It's a Kraken shark. It's a sharkin. It's a Krakark. It's the Kraken. I don't know. Megalodon didn't sound as powerful. I don't know. What do you think we should call it? Leave your comments below. Yeah. For the projectiles, I used a similar approach. I don't know why I went, yeah. That was not in the script. For the projectiles, I used a similar approach as the cluster missiles that the enemies fire, just with kind of faster speed, less spread, and different effects. It's still super powerful, but I'm not 100% on this one. As a god-tier weapon, the god-tier weapon, I kind of feel like it needs a little more, I don't know what, but I'll probably come back to this eventually. Maybe give the missiles like some guidance so they're more likely to hit enemies, or just make it stronger. Maybe it's more in the effects. Maybe it just needs the sound. I'm not sure what's up with it, but right now I think the Hydra is cooler. But anyway, so that about wraps it up for weapons this month. Hopefully they're all good enough to be kind of functional and won't need further work apart from maybe bug fixing, small tweaks, or polish if we get a lot of feedback. Speaking of feedback, that brings us to the next major thing I was working on this month, Alpha 1.0, which, okay, I don't know if that actually has like a defined meaning, but in this case it means the first build of the game that was actually sent out and other people started playing it. Using one of the free plugins I got on the Unreal Marketplace, the other month, I was able to block out a big testing level over the span of a few days. The design for this was to have a linear path that kind of teaches the player and tests all kind of basic controls and functionality, and then provide a large sandbox area at the end. The entire purpose of this test was just to get feedback on the most basic player experience, such as moving, jumping, crouching, shooting, switching weapons, all these things. I wanted to find all the weird bugs, like, oh, if a player's reloading and then they switch weapons mid-reload, then suddenly they can't reload or whatever. And after getting the map fully blocked out, I thought it worth it to style the environment a little more in line with the game. I figured I could make it look like some actual in-game virtual testing space. So I spent a bit making some cool materials for the blockout geometry, which give it a virtual look. This also helped make the environment darker, which would better reflect the actual game and allow the kind of glow and VFX to pop a little more. I worked with my musician and sound designer after Infinity, and we actually were going to surprise people with some early sound design for the game. We didn't really want to do half of it, however, we didn't want to half do it, I guess, so we wanted to actually do it like the right way. So we decided to start integrating and using the software Wise, which is some sort of audio thing that integrates with game engines. If you literally play like any game made in the last few years, you'll probably notice the Wise logo somewhere on the startup screen. We actually managed to get a fair amount of work done on some of the sound design, integrating it into the project, handling some of the various conditions, such as like sustains and interrupts. But shortly before releasing the alpha, we decided that the sounds weren't really in a good state where we wanted to have them in yet, and the fact that there would still be a whole bunch of like missing sounds was probably going to make the experience kind of feel even more janky than just not having sounds. Like, it was weird hearing gunshots and then the enemies just pop without like any sound. This wasn't time wasted, however, as the goal here was to start, get this process of doing sound for games and using Wise, and many of the sounds that we created will still end up being used. I released the alpha out to all my patrons and the Discord, which is mostly the patrons and some close friends, and we had a whole bunch of fun time watching everyone interact with all the game stuff for the first time. It was great seeing people do all like kind of crazy things where I was like, oh, no one's going to be able to get out of the map unless they took every single crate, put it all in the corner of the map and stacked it up in a huge pile, and then literally like 20 minutes later someone had already gone in the corner and stacked up the crates, and we were running around on top of the map, which was great. I loved it. It was fun. It was also good practice kind of just building the game, as I hadn't actually done a build of the game in a long time, and sure enough, I ran into a few like bugs? What would you call that? Like, it was bugging while I was building it, and I couldn't build the game. Took a whole literally a whole evening to figure it out, but now I've got the game stable and building properly, found out what the problems were. The most important thing, however, was the feedback, which brings us to the third and final topic this month: bug fixing and polish. The alpha test level helped improve the game on two different levels. First, it actually encouraged me to fix as many of the problems that I had been kind of putting off, that I knew players were going to find. I was like, these are things I know people are going to mention it, I should probably fix it now. This involved like way too many little tweaks and improvements and stuff to even list. I don't even have records of everything I did this month on that. It was things like, if the player crouched, went under an edge, and then they uncrouched, the player would stand up inside of it. But then if I was like, okay, if I prevented them from standing back up, then if they were to let go of crouch, but they're still crouched, and then if you were walking out from under the edge, you'd still be crouched, then you have to make sure to keep checking it for when he goes out of the space. But then there was these weird little jostles with the camera due to how Unreal kind of handles the crouch behavior, so I had to add some code to make the crouch nice and smooth. But then if the player crouched in the air, it would still teleport him back because there's no more physics, so I had to code more. There's all this weird little things. Really didn't. I wanted this whole the crouch behavior to be nice and smooth, unlike it is out of the box. Just stuff to make it better. Those are the things I put in. Then the second layer of improvements from the alpha came from the feedback I got from testers. They helped find a lot of little problems the things I wanted to find, such as this is one where if you use an ability in the middle of a reload, the ability would keep going. They also found a funny dash problem where you could just dash vertically super high and get out of the map. And then there's some minor just tweaking and tuning, things that people pointed out. I've already implemented some of the feedback immediately upon receiving it, but I do have a Google form where I'm collecting those feedback, and as soon as this devlog releases, that's going to be my first task next month, to go through as much of that as possible, just get the basic player experience just polished up a little bit more. And one other thing that doesn't really fit any of these three categories, I set up a system for enemies to get destroyed a little bit better, as now they drop pieces of themselves which kind of land around on the ground. They no longer just pop out of existence when exploding. I set this up on the standard drone and the turrets, but still need to go around to the heavy drone. I actually found modeling the destroyed things a lot more difficult than doing non-destroyed stuff. So that finishes up this month. I just barely managed to finish everything with the weapons. That was literally like I finished the last weapon stuff on the Kraken like today of doing this, recording this devlog. So now I can move on from that and not, you know, be task switching back and forth a lot, which is good to avoid. Don't need to relearn all the weapon stuff for the rest of the game. My goal now is to do all the enemies next, and once all the, you know, now that all the weapons are done, once the enemies are done, technically the game part will be done, because that's what you'll mostly be doing in the game. You'll be moving around, you'll be shooting, there'll be enemies, and you're fighting that. Next is just literally just making the environments look nice, you know, making the environments, making levels, making it look nice, and then the story. And that's, at that point, that's a game. Obviously there'll be a little more and other little things to consider, but we're almost there. As always, huge thanks to everyone who supported me on Patreon. I received many new pledges this month after my last devlog, and it really does help support me being able to do this as a solo indie developer, my first game. But please consider pledging. Although it's not a full reward yet, whenever I do make like kind of future builds of the game for people to play, it'll probably be Patreon exclusive. So if you're interested in kind of playing these early builds, giving some super early alpha feedback stuff, that's the way to go. And finally, before I end, something a bit more kind of conversational. In a previous devlog, I mentioned wanting to do some tutorials, and I absolutely still do. Those who know my previous work will know I've done a lot of tutorials and stuff. However, in this case, I kind of felt like I should probably wait till I finish the game before doing any UE4 tutorials. I think it might be crass to kind of like, oh, here's how to do this awesome effect, and then like 4 months from now when I'm like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, optimize my game, oh crap, it's causing like a bug and crashes my game or something. You shouldn't do it that way. But if I have a working game that's complete, optimized, it's done, it's on the store, you can play it, then at least I know, you know, you can do things the way I did it and still get a good game. But on top of that, however, I've always been interested in doing some sort of analytical type videos. Something, if you're familiar with like Game Maker's Toolkit, but maybe not quite that analytical, maybe a little more conversational, or just discussing some opinions on game design, mechanics, etc. More along the lines, honestly, of like a podcast, just with lots of accompanying kind of footage too. For example, I was recently thinking about fishing mechanics in games, and how literally every game you play always has the same fishing mechanics. It's always kind of like, you sit there, you throw the thing, you wait for it to bob, you click it, you get your fish. And I always find that I don't personally really enjoy that. I was reading online the other day, like on things, people were saying, oh yeah, this mechanic, it sucks, I hate doing the fishing and stuff. So I'd like making videos about these kind of things, maybe help spur some conversation, get developers kind of thinking, maybe trying new things, or maybe avoiding certain things that might be problematic. And I was just curious to see if anyone would be interested in those sort of videos before I start committing like any kind of serious time to that. So let me know in the comments below if that interests you. Anyway, that's all. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next devlog. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you get notified. Check out some skills and learn how to do a website.